Today we're going to do more of a code demonstration dealing with data validation in the .NET ecosystem. Basically in our class, we're going through this Muroc textbook and it gets to the data validation chapter. And a lot of the techniques are basically outdated at this point. I mean, the book isn't that old. The book's a 2023 published, but things move fast. And so there's newer techniques that I'm going to cover dealing with. And this is this Fluent Validation library, as you can see the docs here. That's really what we're going to implement. And so that's the direction I want to take the class, is to use this Fluent Validation library. And we're just going to get off the ground running with our MVC apps, and we're going to do some kind of basic validation. I guess you can consider regular expressions as part of basic validation and even comparing two properties. And so there's some things that we've been able to validate so far with attributes on the model that Fluent Validation can also handle for us. But then there's some other things in addition to the data validation that we're already able to do. And so we're actually able to hit the database and determine, does this product already exist or does this user already exist? Working with date validation and determining, if you're trying to schedule an appointment in the future, we need to actually work with some date validations and making sure that this date is in the past or in the future. And then conditionally validate data. These are the kinds of things that the book covers, number one, so I want to cover them with Fluent Validation, but that can be done in addition to what we've already done with what are called validation attributes, which go on the model. Okay, so I'm going to start by kind of cloning this repo that I've been working with my class, and just from a starter point, for my code. And so that's what we're doing today, Fluent Validation with this library, and this is the starting point, and it's going to be a code demo, so you guys will be able to reference this for your labs. And I'll kind of spin up this. And this is a good starting point for this demonstration, because it has certain things that we already need. Like we got Tailwind set up and we got user accounts and all this kind of stuff. We have domain models, like we have products. And so I'm going to be working with products. And I'm going to be working with validating data when I'm creating a new product. I don't have the functionality in this application right now to create a new product, and that's what I'm going to do, along with kind of talking about the pros and cons of these attributes as we go. Okay, so here's the app, here's the products. Again, this is called the domain model because it ties into the database. There is a database behind this. This database is called Shopping Cart Demo. Just for this demo, I'm going to call it Shopping Cart Demo 123. And if I kind of run the update database command, this is an entity framework command to look at the migrations folder and kind of create the database using entity framework. We'll get that going, and that way we can look at the kind of the current schema for the database, which has, again, products and orders and user accounts. But I think there's just a couple of products that are seed data, So let's kind of take a quick look at that. As I go into my Object Explorer, and here's my demo database. And I look at the tables. So I've got identity tables, orders, and products. If I kind of view the data on my products, I've got 4 products that are my seed data. Just kind of some dummy products. But I do not have the ability to create a new product. If I go into my controllers, here's my product controller. I can kind of see an index method that kind of gets all the products. So this is listing all of the products. That is the index method. If I collapse that, and then I can get a singular product details, so like /product details 5. I can kind of look a single product up, and that's really the only methods that belong inside my product controller. All right, so that's just kind of where the starting point is. Now, in order to use this library, and again, here's the docs, and you could just Google search FluentValidation, one word, and you can see this is this .NET library. And as I get into show you, it's very popular. This is a very popular, millions of downloads, lots of use, and good reason why. It's good. It's a good validation library, at least based on what I've seen. And if my class, you remember kind of the validation libraries we've used, you're going to see a lot of similarities. We've used Joy on our express routes last semester, and then we used for TypeScript validation. I can't think of the darn name right now. Zod, thank you, Zod. We use Zod on the front end. So we've used validation libraries before, and we understand the importance of, you want to validate your data. You cannot trust data from the client. You must do server-side validation. And again, best practices here are to validate in 3 places. You're going to validate on the client using JavaScript. You're going to validate on the server. In this case, we're going to validate on the server with FluentValidation. And you also validate data in the database, because keep in mind, especially in the SQL world, our databases are pretty strict. Like if I look at my columns, like we only allow integers into this product ID column, and we only allow varchars, nvarchars, in this name column. And so we have data types on our columns. And if you try and put, the wrong data type into the column, you will get a SQL Server exception, not allowing it. And so again, you kind of have data validation in 3 places. And specifically, we're focusing on server side right now with FluentValidation. So like we've done before, when we're managing our server dependencies, we're working with the NuGet package manager. So these are our server dependencies, and we can kind of see what's already been installed. Entity framework, right, for our database, identity for our user accounts, more entity frameworks. And so not a whole lot of dependencies, but let's go ahead and browse for, and there's 2 here with FluentValidation. So if I search for FluentValidation, one word, you can see there 851 million downloads, very popular dependency, and I'm just going to install it here. Now this is version 12, so this is the latest version of FluentValidation. And version 12 supports .NET 10. So we're on .NET 10, being that we're just spinning up brand new apps here. So we're just choosing the latest version, so .NET. Version 12 supports .NET 10. Let's go ahead and install that. And this is the second one, this dependency injections. What we're going to do is we're going to make a validator class, and then we're going to inject that into our controllers. And so using dependency injection. And so in order to do that, we need to install this. All right, so now we've got these couple of new dependencies installed. And let me kind of close down what I'm not going to be using. Okay, so I'm gonna reference this product model. Let's go ahead and collapse that. I've got the product controller. All right. So as I get into here, this fluent validation, and this little example does a whole lot for us. This first example on the docs really does a whole lot. You can see everything here is set up on a class that we're going to create. And that class has a parent. We're going to inherit from this abstract validator class. So this is a class that comes with the library. And so this is, until you install the dependency, this is not a thing. And it's a couple of things, right? It accepts a generic. So this is the data type that we're validating. In this case, they're validating a customer. So it's, a generic type, right? And it serves as our parent. Okay, it's this abstract validator class is abstract. So you're not instantiating this class. All we're doing is inheriting from this class. Okay, and then all of the work, as you'll see here, is in the constructor. Notice the constructor is right here. And all the validation rules are defined in the constructor. And you can write custom validation logic, which we'll do a little bit of that. Okay, but basically these rule 4s, this is now where we're going to write our validation inside of this constructor. And I mean, that really kind of gets you kind of most of the way there. Now, to the problem with these validation attributes. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of comment these out. Okay, and instead of using, these are called validation attributes, and these attributes are built into .NET. And I'm going to use our package Fluent Validation instead. So why? I'm not worried about validating neighbor. I can keep those on there. Why would I replace these validation attributes with this dependency? Well, the first thought that came to my mind is now what we're doing is we're kind of taking validation, the job of validation, and we're putting it in two places. So for an organizational point of view, putting all your validation in one place is it just makes sense. Instead of saying, oh, is the validation in this place or is the validation in that place? It is logical to put all your validation rules in one place so you know where to look. There's also something called the single responsibility pattern, SRP, single responsibility pattern. And when we put our validation attributes on the model, you are inherently breaking the single responsibility pattern. The model, now this is the domain model, is responsible for entity framework and the database, creating the tables in the database. But we're doing validation in here as well. And so there's a couple of reasons just right there why it makes sense to take the validation out of these attributes and put them somewhere else. And we do that a couple of times in this class where we get it to work and then we learn, well, there's actually a better way. And so this is one of those times where it's like, well, we can do some validation here, but it's also a little bit limited in what it can do, as far as you can't do some of these more intermediate, what I would consider intermediate level validation. You could do a lot of basic validation, but to do these things, not so easy. And I'm not going to say you can't, but it's more of the old way of doing it versus the new way. Okay, so there's several reasons to move to it. So let's get into it. Let's create a new folder where we're going to create our validation classes in here. Again, using the documentation, I'm just going to call this validators. Here's our validators, and I'm going to be validating a product. So let's add a product validator class. Okay, this is a .C# class, and I'm going to start up at the top with a using FluentValidation. Okay, that allows us to inherit from the abstract validator parent, and what we're validating is product. Now that's not going to compile because we don't have the models folder, so I need to say using our models folder, we can now validate our product. And again, all the work is going to be done inside of the constructor. So here's our constructor, and this is going to be where we set up the validation rules. And if I go back to my product controller, notice I've got a required and a string length. So these are going to be the validation rules that I replace on the name attribute. So we're just going to validate the name at first. Just do one thing at a time, just kind of get it up and running. And then once I get the first thing validating, we'll kind of roll through a few others. But this is required in string length 200. Okay. How do we validate that here? Well, as you kind of saw, we could say .length between 50 and 250. You can kind of see that. Let's go to built-in validators. So under built-in validators, and this is where you can get a lot of functionality from what's built in. As far as a maximum length. So you can see here, rule 4 customer, and then customer.property maximum length. And so just right here in the docs, number one, getting started, I'm showing you how to get started, but a lot of functionality is going to be under these built-in validators. There's an email validator, there's a credit card validator, less than validator. Okay, you get the idea. And so it always starts with rule 4. Rule 4, product, and this is link syntax. So we got prod.name attribute. So we are validating the name attribute. Not empty. So required field. Maximum length 200, and all I'm doing is replacing what I had on the attributes before. Okay, so separation of concerns. We are now separating the validation concern into its own class. We're taking it off of the domain model, and single responsibility pattern, we are now enforcing that, which is considered a better practice. Of course, everything in MVC, separate the concerns, single responsibility, helps for troubleshooting, helps for writing unit tests, just helps across the board. So one validation rule that's required, essentially not empty, and maximum length of 200. Okay, now the next step. Okay, and we'll be coming back to this. I'm going to go to my program CS, and there is a line to inject the validator into our controllers. And this is kind of a catch-all line. I'm going to put this right above the .build method. So again, this is kind of a middleware. It's adding to our services, right? So this is a strange line because what this does, and I left a comment here, this line automatically scans your project and registers all the validators it finds. So we just wrote a validator, and that line will scan our project, find the validator, and inject our product validator for the controllers. Right, so this is kind of a little bit of boilerplate, and this is done differently in version 12. And so if you kind of look at the documentation, you look at some older documentation, this looks a lot different. But this is nice because if you have multiple validators, you don't need to inject them individually. This is kind of a catch-all. This will inject all of the validators. So it's kind of a nice compared to the old way. All right, now in our product controller is already accepting our context for our database. But now, let me put a comma there, because now we are also going to accept a validator, iValidator of type product, and we're going to call it _validator. Okay, and again, this is kind of that nicer, newer syntax called a primary constructor, which is confusing because there's already a default constructor, but regardless, this is a newer C# syntax for your constructor. And this is our MVC controller. And we now have this _validator method. So now we get to write our method to create a new product. So public async, by the way, this is an HTTP GET. Asynchronous task I action result create, and no parameters. I load up the view bag with categories. Again, we just talked about, and this is kind of a neat way we can actually load up an instance of a select list that is filled with our database categories. The value is the category ID, and the name, obviously, the name field. And so we'll populate our categories using this select list, and that's on the view. And then we're just going to return view. Okay, so this is our get method to go ahead and get the create view, of which I have to create. So here's views, here's product, and let's add our new view. This will be called create CSHTML. And this is a strongly typed model of type product. Okay. So for the sake of this, I'm just going to have a name field. And before here, I'll just have a simple form that calls create, and I'm going to be modifying this as I go. And with my Tailwind classes, inside of that form, I've got a div, and I've got ASP4 tag helper for the name and a text box for the name. So a label for the name and a text box for the name. and an error span, right? This is ASP validation for name, right? So 3 fields: the label, the text box, and the span for the error. And then I need a submit button. And my submit button, again, this is just going to be really crude, ugly, just to get it doing a little bit of validation. So here's my submit button with all the Tailwind classes, and it says create. Okay. So that will at least get me to a post, right? This will post to the create method on the controller, right? So now I get to write the post method, HTTP post public async task iAction result create product. Okay. Okay, but now we've got underscore validator. So the first thing we do is we run a validation method. So notice what I'm doing is I'm creating a result, and let me just refactor this to be prod. So notice underscore validator, that's our product validator that we injected into the controller. We say validate async and then pass in the prod. If the result is not valid, and that's right there. If the result is not valid, when you call this validate async, there is an errors collection, essentially an array. You can loop over that array. And right here is where the magic happens. Model state, add model error. Model state is like the one useful thing in our chapter that I will refer you guys to. If you have your textbook, where it talks about the model state property. Model state is what the view uses if you in the next line of code. So you know what you might remember, if model state is valid, right? So you can modify the model state to add errors, and the book does talk about that on page 415. Okay, so add model error, where you're using model validation with the error codes that come back from this validator library. Okay, and we say if the model state is valid, don't need those extra parentheses. Okay, if the model state is valid, well, let's go ahead and save it to our database and then save those changes, add it to the database, save the changes asynchronous, and go to the index method. Go home to the index method. The index method is right here. Okay, so redirect to the index. Otherwise, if it's invalid, if it is valid, you save it. Otherwise, you reload the get method. Right? You go back to the get method essentially and display the error message. This right here should display, should get us to display that error message. And let's go ahead and put a breakpoint in here, assuming we can get this far if I didn't make any other mistakes. So let's go ahead and run this in debugging mode. and see if we get that far. Oh, we're not going to get that far without a link. We need to actually have a link to get to that method. However, I should be able to just type it in since I know the path once this boots up. Okay, hopefully this boots. It does boot. That's good. It's a first boot, so interesting that it's spinning like this. That doesn't seem right. What are you doing? Hosting failed to start. Address already in use. Okay, let me stop that because I got other windows open. That's what's going on. Try that again. That's better. All right, go to my products. There's my products. Products/create. Should get me to the get. If I say create item, create. Okay. So that's good, but I didn't hit it in debugging mode. So that was my mistake. Of course, it crashed out. I would have expected my validation error to return an error. Products. /create item. Okay. Okay, now a little bit of troubleshooting is needed because that should have caused a validation error. Wait a minute, it has a name. So what am I talking about? I got to leave the name blank. No troubleshooting needed. I just need to think about my validation rules. Leave it blank. Silly. Now that runs. Model state should not be valid. We should go there. I'm going to click continue. And the name field is required. It is a default error message. You can customize it. I'll show you how to do that. But okay, we got validation going using this new tool. So we're off the ground, up and running. Now we can continue to explore. Back to our validator and our product. So string length 1000, whether that is the best validation rule or not. Okay. As I'm doing this, notice one string is not nullable and one string is nullable. So I just want to point this out, that the name is not nullable and the description is nullable. So we have nullable reference types, that's what NRTs, and what this does is a couple of things, but number one, it changes the database design. So to show you guys this, and you'll find this interesting, I think, because of Entity Framework, the way this works is that name is not null, but description is null. So by marking this in C# as not null or nullable, it's also kind of automatic that since this is not null, it it's kind of by default a required field. So I think I can leave that off. And because it's not null, I think that will still, I'll have to test this. I haven't tested this. But because name does not allow nulls, I think that's going to trip that. And if it doesn't, no big deal. You just add it on. But I'm just going to test it. /create. At least it does create. Yeah, see, it does. So that's kind of cool. I mean, whatever. It's just you don't have to say not empty because of the data type does not allow nulls, whereas this one does allow nulls. Okay. It's actually, you know, I don't mind that it says not empty because that's explicit and you understand it. Leaving that off there, you got to know under the hood how it works, which is fine, but okay, so now maximum length 1000. Nothing too big deal there. Kind of go back to our product. We got a price. And again, this is the price field, and this one right now is not nullable. So again, that's kind of optional right here. But if you want your own custom message, you could say price is required. You kind of saw that it was pretty descriptive, whether you say price is required or you leave that off. But just to show you how to provide your own custom message, put the extra E on there. And let me go back to my view, because if I'm going to have a name, I got to have these other fields as well. So let me just provide a outer div around the form. For some positioning, close the div there. Close this down. And then I'm going to add, there's my name fields. Here's the same thing for description, right? This is all the same stuff for description. The only thing here is text of red, right? So we got some Tailwind classes for our validator. And so that's auto margining, padding. I add another one after the description. Kind of add a little grid in here. Probably not. And then inside of there, we have our price. So if we're going to validate the price, let's do that. Get those fields on there. Close that down. All right, so back after a little bit of a break. Lost my train of thought. We were validating name, description, and price, I think. Yeah. So let's go ahead, boot that up. Cool. I wanted to show this, so if you guys are online, if you want to go ahead and hop back onto my screen share. Notice how I get a good for name. but price, not so much. Description isn't required. So let's, I say not null, maybe not empty. I don't think that's actually the fix. But I did notice that was difference for name. Obviously, null is different than empty. An empty string is technically what that is. The way that would be submitted would just be an empty string, but still I get the value blank is invalid. And solution for that, as we've seen before, now I do see here name. If I'm just, name is a string, but obviously price is a decimal. And so the solution, as I've always known it, and maybe there's another solution, is to mark it as nullable. And that's always been just a way that this works kind of out of the box. When you mark that as nullable, all these other things here, you need to fix, because these are now nullable price, and you need to say product price or 0. And so if I go into my cart controller, syntax for that, is it an or 0? Oh, that's a ternary question 0M. So that's that. This you go here, and this you go here, since those are now nullable. So if you get that error message that does not make sense, that's the fix. Now it says pricey is required because that's the error message I gave it. Just to compare it, close that, close details, close cart controller, just keep the things open that I need. If I go back to my validator and I get rid of the price must not be empty is kind of the default message. So whether you want a custom validator, validation message or not. And then you could also say, hey, price greater than 0. Price must be greater than 0. So I'm just taking this step at a time. Now this is a number field, so I can't put in a letter. But if I put in a negative value, obviously 0 is also not accepted if you use greater than 0. Suppose -1 if you want to accept the 0. There's your little trick for that. Let's go back to our, so again, what I'm doing is I'm replacing these with the new syntax. So the image URL, maximum length of 500. Again, these are business rules as determined by the business decision makers. The quantity, now I'll mark that as, did I mark that as nullable? Product. I'll come back to that. I'll mark it nullable if I need to, if I get the. So stock quantity. And here is how we're going to force a category ID. It says, please select a category. So this is the foreign key column, but you can write rules against the foreign key column. So back over here on the create, got to bring in these new fields. Underneath price, we've got stock quantity. Image URL. Here is our select so that we can have a category. Whoop, I'm going to put that inside of that grid. So here's our select. Notice our ASP items is our view bag categories. So the categories get loaded into the select tag. Kind of a default option. There's your error message for the category. There's an is active, which I did not write I didn't write any validation rules for is active, so there's no validation rules for that. And a submit button. Okay, so that's just replacing the rules that we kind of already had before we get on to some newer and cooler stuff. Okay, so when you have quantity, the value blank is invalid, and the category ID, that again goes back to our model. And category ID is now nullable, is active is now nullable. Let's do a build, make sure there's no compiler errors. And cart controller, add to cart. Oh, that was the wrong field. Not is active, stock quantity. There we go. Save that, Control S, build. There we go. I'm going to hurry this along, guys, because I got a 2:30 meeting. So we did the basic stuff, got a couple more things to demo, and now it says, please select a category, stock quantity, price must not be empty, name field is required. All good there. Couple more things. Again, let's just close it all down. Couple more things to show off on my product validator. Regular expressions. I'm gonna make SKU number. You can kind of see here. So you can write good old regular expressions, custom formatted. We're gonna have a SKU number, hyphen, digit, 3 uppercase letters, followed by a hyphen, ending with 4 digits. And so on my product, I'm gonna add this field. It did not exist before, but I'm just showing you this field for the regular expressions. Models, product. So SKU number. Let's go to our product here and just add in this field for the demonstration purposes. So here is a rule for the SKU number. Here's our regular expression, 3 letters, hyphen, 4 numbers, along with a message. And here's the conditional rendering. I did mention conditional rendering, conditional validation. So you're only validating this when the string for the SKU number is not null or empty. So if they don't give you a SKU number, you don't validate it. But if they do give you a SKU number, then you validate it. So this is, again, conditional validation. That's one of the new things. Regular expressions were not one of the new things, but this was the conditional validation. And it's just a when method. When this condition exists, then you run the validation. And last but not least, we need to add the control for the SKU number, and I put that underneath my description. Doesn't really make a big difference, but here's my description div, and here is my SKU number div. Product create, there's my SKU number. Now notice it doesn't hit any validation errors, but if I start typing, we get XXX. Okay, so we got our regular expression and we have our conditional validation. This is probably the neatest, these two here are the neatest new things that we can do. Database duplicate check and date validation. So let's just add in, and also comparing 2 properties. I got those 3 left to do. Now the way to compare 2 properties, I made a sale price. So sale versus sale price. And I made up a rule that the sale price must be at least 10%. So 10% of the regular full price. So that's comparing 2 fields. But in order to do that, I need a sale price set on the model. So I've got price, and I'm going to add in sale price. Nullable field. And let's compare 2 fields. There's also a conditional, right? When the sales price has a value and the price has a value. So you have to have a sales price and a price to compare the 2. And here's a must method the sales price must be less than 10%. It's kind of the less than 10%. So the way that flushes out, it's got to be more than 10% off. Oh, forgot to add the field. Let's go ahead and go to the view, add the field. And right next to the price, I put the sale price. So here's price. Underneath it, we have sale price. There's price, there's sales price. Again, you kind of don't get it out of the box. If you don't have a sale price, you don't get, but if I say, hey, sale price is $9.50, that's not 10, that's not more than 10%. Sales price must be at least 10%. So even $9 is not greater than 10%, but if I go $8.99, now it passes our validation. So that's comparing two fields. Next up, we have a database lookup. So this is a database duplicate check. So we're going to check for duplicate product names. We're not going to allow the same product name to be in there twice. So this is pretty cool. So if I go to my product validator, okay, walk through this. Now, underscore context, this is our database context, and we need to inject that. So let's bring that in. Private read-only application context. So let's bring this in. And in our constructor, it gets injected in. Then we initialize it right here. So now underscore context is a valid field. So we can hit our database. So now we have a must async method where you pass in the product, a name field, and cancellation. Here we run and await to see if it exists. The product's name, you're checking if the database name to lower equals the name that the user sent in to lower. So it's a database to lower and a string from the view to lower, and that the product IDs match. And return not exist, returns true if no duplicate is found. And then here a product with this name already exists. So here's a little, and that always messages you, that's reverse logic, so it's always backwards. You gotta stop and think about it. Products. Okay, now there's a couple of new fields on our model, but our database doesn't know about them, so that's what that error message is. Let me make sure there's nothing else on our model before I run a migration. So back on my model, there's one more thing I'm going to do here for release date. I'm going to add a release date field. Stock quantity. Okay. So that should be good for add validation demo. And I'm also going to add that release date that came after my stock quantity. So update database. Okay, after my stock quantity, I'm adding in my release date. So it's going to allow us to do some date checks. And now let's boot it. Okay, so we're checking for the duplicate names. So wireless mouse, for example, should already exist. Create name of wireless mouse, and we get our database. Now if I just simply change that, that goes away, right? All we're checking is the name. So I'm a big fan of that, hitting the database and actually, determining if something in the database already exists. Don't add it twice. That's very practical. And two more things, a date validation, and I can't believe I left off there's one more thing that I brought into this, which is, hey, right now everything is happening on post. And we've definitely used websites before where if I kind of just say item, and I tab off, that error message, if the website is coded with client-side triggers, that blur, that's called the blur when you tab off or you click off. When that blur event triggers, you can run validation on client-side events, not only posting, okay, but blur events. And so I'm going to show you how to write a little bit of JavaScript so it runs validation events on blur as opposed to waiting for the post to happen, because that's way better. It's just getting your fields to update as you tab off of them. And it does require some vanilla JavaScript, but it's worth it. And once you kind of see how it's done, you could definitely implement that. So date validation would be next, right? So here I've got a release date must be before January 1st, 2026. For whatever reason, I'm just saying all my products were before January 1st. That's the business rule. I made it up. Businesses can do that. So let's go into the product validator. And here is a date check, right? So here, less than or equal to, and then a date object. So less than or equal to January 1st, 2026. When the release date has a value. Okay, so there's less than or equal to, of course, and greater than or equal to, so you can kind of figure it out from those couple of methods. So those two features right there, on top of just being, in general, a better place to write your validation rules, and what I would consider a more modern approach. Product create. So if I set to today, and I just did that so that, Everything was going so smooth. What error message was that? Let me just close it all down. Let's see, maybe need a little bit of troubleshooting. Okay, let's put a post. There's my product prod. Okay, we hit the breakpoint. P name, var exists. An exception was thrown while attempting to evaluate the link. See the inner exception. Enable sensitive data logging. It breaks on that line right there. Rule 4 P name. It was working. Let's throw this in. Name to lower, throw the null reference exception, add a when condition. Makes sense. Only check duplicates if name is provided. I guess I didn't hit that condition in my testing. Product with that name already exists. Dot when. That makes perfect sense. Let's boot it up. Product create, release date today, should not pass validation. Nice, nice, nice. Okay, last but not least, we're gonna get some client-side events validating with some vanilla JavaScript. Again, I encourage you guys to hit the docs and read through the docs. Yeah, I'm gonna be 5 minutes late. Okay. I'll see you there though. So in our view, in the create view, okay, we can bring in some scripts. So set at section scripts. So if you want to bring in JavaScript scripts just on this view, we can bring in the validation scripts partial, which I don't even know that I have that on here. So that might not even be necessary. But here's I'm just gonna copy and paste this code. Here's a big old chunk of JavaScript with notes, and I will push this onto my repo so you guys can kind of read through the notes. But basically, when this page loads, right? When this page loads, vanilla JavaScript here, right? So read the form, so store that in a JavaScript variable called form. These are the three fields that I'm validating. So I'm only providing client-side validation. And what this is going to do is this is going to hit an endpoint on my server. I haven't made that endpoint. So whenever I tab off of these fields, that will hit a controller endpoint. So got to make that controller endpoint. This method right here is just used for styling. So this is used for Tailwind classes. Here, this is used for all of the controls on the form to wire up blur events on all of them. And here you're only doing the blur events on the fields to validate. So these are the fields to validate. So it says do the blur on all the fields on the form, but really it's just on the ones that we're validating. Package up some data, so read some form data into an object called data. So here's a JavaScript object called data. And then you send that data right here to the server. Here, this is a product controller validate field method that we need to write. So product controller validate field, we'll come back and write that method. So send that data to that method. It is then responds in a response object, destructure that response object, and style the fields accordingly to that response object. Basically, if there's error messages or whatnot, you basically modify the state of those fields and display those error messages. Now, again, I do need a validate field in the product controller, so let's open up product controller. And product controller. Product controller. So this was the post to create. All right, here's that method that I wrote. It takes in the data from the front end, instantiates a product, runs the validator on the server, stores it in a result, sends that result back as JSON. I really like this because, in chapter 9 or chapter 7, we talked about razor views and sending back JSON. So here's an example of sending back JSON to the client. And a custom class that we can use as a parameter here that has a field name, a product ID, and name, so on and so forth. Okay, and this just matches the type. So the camel casing that we use on the front end. Okay, so again, that's pretty nice because that sends every time you blur the field, we should get some nice snappy responses from our server validation. Cool. Okay, so wireless mouse is a product that we already have. /create. And if I say wireless mouse and tab off, you could see it does that database call without having to do a full post, right? But if I edit valid, right? That's, obviously, I don't know about you guys, but this is like a total pet peeve of mine. When you get forms with good validation like this, you tab off and get name must not be empty. Okay, so now all that looks good except why then is my item not here? So let's troubleshoot that one last thing because my item should be in the database if my post was good. So if result is not valid, if model state is valid, so let's put in a breakpoint and see what's going wrong. But we're 99% done. Product, create, item. Oh, it does exist, it's just not showing it. Item does exist. It's in my database, but my view is not showing it. Why is my view not showing it? Product, index. So here's searching products, categories for each product in the model. If I go to my products, it's got item in there. So what? Where's my item? Products. Need a breakpoint. Product controller. Index. Oh, only the is active products. That's why my product was not marked as active, so it's being filtered out. But the code is working as intended. If I don't want that, I just get rid of that where. Awesome. Okay. A little bit rushed on this one, but nonetheless, you guys will have access to the source code. I will push this to my repo. Right, so let me push that. Okay, commit and push. If you guys do a pull on that repo, you will have access to all the source code I just wrote. So if I did any of it too fast, as I did, you'll have access to it. All right, I'm going to stop that recording.